Welcome back to the podcast. This is B-Side Banter, and this is kind of exciting. I've decided to start kind of a offshoot, a different segment of the podcast. I'm calling it Influence. So this is technically episode 1 of Influence, and everything that kind of goes with this is around the creators of music. So I have just wanted to, talk to producers, talk to artists, talk to people involved in the creation of music, and just talk about the influences, the things that the bands, the artists, the people that have influenced them to do what they're doing currently. So I'm here with my first guest, Tone Deaf, and I found Tone Deaf through his work with Briston Moroney, one of my favorite songs that he's ever put out, Freaking Out on the Interstate. You did production on that, and it's such a great song. I feel like that's probably like his breakthrough song. You can probably speak to that a little bit more. But you also have done work with Gatlin, the Moss, obviously lots and lots and lots of other people. But yeah, I'm just gonna kick it to you. You said you go by Tone? That's like in the industry, that's what people call you, Tone. So I'm gonna kick it to you, Tone, and yeah, you can just maybe give like a little intro of yourself, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Thanks for having me, Tyler. Yeah, I go by Tone. It's not. There's a funny story about that. I didn't just name myself Tone one day. It's not how it happened at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
When I was first starting out, I was interning at a studio in Oakland, California,
Hmm.
and which is where I'm from originally.
Mhm.
And I got an engineering gig with my first engineering gig on a major label record, DreamWorks, which was a label at the time, not anymore.
Hmm.
With this band that no one ever heard of or anything like that. Nothing happened with
Yeah,
them. But
sure.
the owner of the studio at the time we were making this record at, he he would listen to stuff that I was doing. He'd be like, "Oh, you get good tones. You get good tones." And then,
Mm,
you're there for a few months, and then every day I'd walk in and get my coffee and do my thing, and he'd go, hey, Tone," and he'd kind of do that thing. It was
nice.
like, huh, it's like, okay, okay, whatever. And
Yeah.
then, 6 months later, this album's done and everything, and on the actual credit was engineered by Tone, and I was
That's
so mad. I was so mad, but
that's
the the um the artist had picked that up from the studio owner
wow.
and put that as my credit. And of course I thought it was going to be this huge record and it was going to be my
Yeah.
claim to fame, the whole thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I'm
yeah,
like, you
yeah.
can't say that's not my name and no one's going
Yeah.
to know, da, da, da. And it kind of just stuck after that. And then the Tone Deaf kind of happened the same way. A really good artist friend of mine did the same thing. He just put produced by Tone Deaf one day. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, that's you. You're tone deaf. And I'm like, but I'm not tone deaf. And he's like, yeah,
Yeah.
you are. And then that just stuck.
You were like, "That's actually kind of insulting to
Right.
somebody that, like, the whole purpose of what I'm doing is
Right.
to have good tone." Yeah. Wow.
So
Hey, and you stuck to it. I like the commitment that you were like, "Hey, it's just there, and I'm gonna roll with it." That's awesome. That's
pretty
awesome.
funny.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so you've obviously been producing for a long time. You've got your talked about starting in California. You're now in Nashville. Obviously you've lived in two of the biggest music hubs in the US,
Hmm.
so I'm sure you've had
Yes.
tons and tons of exposure. um let's get into a little bit of kind of the whole point of this, which is influence. I'd love to know you sent me some of your like favorite bands, favorite albums, but I'd love for you to go through just maybe like a timeline of who you listen to. It doesn't have to be super detailed, but and just talk about some of these artists, what they did for you, and then yeah, we can dive into some of these a little bit further.
Sure. And the list that I sent you are kind of artists and albums that kind of shaped like just moments in my life where I was like, this, I don't know how they made this record. I want to make that.
Hmm.
I want to do that.
Yeah.
And even before knowing that I wanted to be a producer or anything like that, I was always kind of curious about sound and
Hmm.
how do they do those things and
Sure.
all that. I mean, I'm a classically trained pianist, and that's how I started when I was
Mm.
4,
Wow.
and always knew I wanted to do something in music. I didn't know, obviously, I didn't know this was a job or a thing or
Mm.
even whatever. But yeah, like I remember uh, the biggest moment I feel was when I heard Dr. Dre's The Chronic album. This is a long time
Mm,
ago, and, like, I think I was in, like, the 7th
yeah.
grade or 8th grade or something, and I was like, "What is this?" Like, it's just different than anything I've ever heard.
Yeah,
I don't know what that meant, and
absolutely.
I'm a huge hip hop head. I mean, that's kinda what I grew up listening to, um,
Hmm.
and I feel like that's translated a little bit into I primarily do indie rock and kinda like indie pop
Hmm.
stuff now, and I feel like that sound translates a little bit into that. I like darker sounding records and
Hmm.
thicker, thumpier low end and stuff like that just in
Yeah.
general.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Dr. Dre, The Chronic, that album, like, completely, like, changed,
Hmm.
like, music for me, for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. That's like the pinnacle of definitely the album when it came out for sure. But then just in hip hop in general, so many people go back to that as being revolutionary, groundbreaking. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, and you like so you obviously you've got several of these. You've got Tupac, you've got Outkast, you've got like some of the biggest hip hop names on here, Beastie Boys. So all of these guys have just like totally revolutionized hip hop specifically, but also, music in general. Um it's it's interesting because I think, and I don't know, like what I guess for you, because you had a hand in producing, what genre would you like consider Briston Moroney to be? Like, obviously he's indie rock, but I've always kind of called it like surf rock. Like that's kind of what
Yeah.
it like sounds like to me. Um, and the Moss is kind of like that too. They have like a similar sound.
Mhm.
Um, what like I think if somebody were to listen to Briston Moroney and then listen to, obviously Dr. Dre, Tupac, Beastie Boys, Outkast, they'd be like, "What? Like what in the world? There's no relation at all." Um, how do you feel like some of those you already kind of mentioned it, but maybe dive in a little bit more how some of those influences have come across on some of these specific like records?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that yeah, the low end and the drums, I like
Mm,
them a little louder. I feel like I just naturally hear things that way with the drums and the low end just kind of more
mhm,
prevalent and the brighter stuff not as prevalent. That's just kind of how I hear things.
mhm,
And I don't know, I feel like the arrangements on those albums, like whether it's Outkast or anything from Dre or anything like that, is there's a what's the way to explain it? Um, th- they put together things really, really well, and I think that where it sounds like there's a lot going on, but there's really
mhm.
not. It's just the parts are very specific and right for the song or for the track or whatever. And I feel
Yeah.
like, I mean, I've definitely made those records where it's wall of sound and there's 200 tracks and you just throw
Yeah.
everything at
Mhm,
everything.
mhm,
But I feel that the best records are not necessarily made that way, where you might think that there's a ton of stuff going on, but there's really like three or four elements. And I
mm,
think um, those records sound bigger and better when there is when you can kind of hear everything and there's this the right space and the right part as opposed to just we'll just throw everything on it. And I
mhm.
think that
Yeah.
all those references definitely contribute to how I hear things as far as whether it's Briston or the Moss
Mhm.
or Gatlin or whoever.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. And like that is like an interesting point. Yeah, there's a lot of simplicity. But like you said, kind of like everything has its specific function, its specific space. And I do find that like music has shifted that way because like obviously around when these albums were coming out, the wall of sound was like the main like that's kind of how like everybody was doing things, especially you think of like punk, pop punk, rock. Like
Hmm.
everything was just like we're just going to give you like so many things, we're going to overload you with so many sounds. And everything's going to be so fast, really changing. Um and then yeah, like hip hop was kind of especially some of these like Outkast. has a lot of simplicity, I always found, to their tracks. Um, but that doesn't mean that you're like kind of listening and you're like, oh wow, like this song is feels empty or something. It's
Mm-hmm.
just that the intentionality is there with every single
Yeah.
part.
Another of my top albums on that list was Tom Petty's Wildflowers, and I think that they did a
Mm,
very similar thing on that album where it's super sparse and like
mhm.
everything is done so tastefully. Where I don't know, I think pretty much every song on that record there's like five things going on, maybe on
Mhm.
a lot of times it's less than that on each song, but it's just done so well and masterfully. You don't feel like you're missing anything. You're like, oh, I'm kind of bored, or you know what I mean?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. And like you obviously you have Green Day's Dookie on here, and I feel like that's one of those albums that kind of is that wall of sound. I don't know if they actually utilize that or not, but like obviously there is some really good work there that, artists do a good job in that setting. But yeah, I think kind of when people saw, hey, simplicity, less is more sometimes. Simplicity can actually make some really meaningful records, and some really great sounds. Um, one of the albums that really caught my eye, just because this is kind of along the lines of what I have really enjoyed from them, is you really enjoy Radiohead, and you picked Kid A as your one of your favorite albums. And I think if you were to talk to Radiohead fans, they would be a little upset, and they would have their opinions on whether or not, that should be somebody's favorite of theirs. Um, but I remember the first time ever hearing that with, like, I had headphones on, and as soon as Everything in Its Right Place came on, like my mind was just blown by that first, just like synth or whatever they're using. I don't like that first, just everything. I was just like, whoa. Yeah, I just felt like this is so different, and this is so like beyond their time. Um, yeah, is I would like to just hear what was really meaningful about that record to you, and why that kind of sits above, OK Computer. Like I find that most of the older Radiohead fans, they're like OK Computer's their best or my favorite, and a lot of the newer Radiohead fans that have come in later, they're like In Rainbows is my favorite or their best. So I haven't came across very many like people that would say Kid A is my favorite or maybe their best album or whatever. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, similar situation. Like when I heard Kid A for the first time, I was just like, I don't, what is this? Like, I've
Mhm,
never heard some of these sounds done this way with with a rock band. And like, I, and maybe it's obviously I wasn't a producer per se. Well, I actually was when that came out, but like, that was kind of like, oh wow, we could like they kind of broke all the rules. You know what I
mhm,
mean? Like within the
yeah,
genre, where it's like I
mhm,
think Dre did the same thing with the Chronic, where it's just
yeah,
like, oh wow, like you can go completely all the way over here, and it still
mhm,
somehow makes sense.
mhm,
Um, and I get it why like fans would be like, what? Like that's there's no guitars on, like you know what I mean? Like yeah, and
yeah,
everything in the
yeah,
right place, which I think is one of the greatest songs ever. But um, yeah, I was completely blown away, and that was kind of an eye opener as far as like, oh, you can really, you don't have to paint within the numbers or within the lines. Like you can do
mhm,
all these other things, and obviously it is artist dependent, and you
yeah,
know,
yeah,
it has to make sense. But yeah, and I mean, I would say In Rainbows and OK Computer are a tied for second for me
yeah,
as far as like,
yeah,
but that album just sonically just did something to me where I was like, it
mhm.
just was an eye opener.
I've noticed, like, obviously a lot of these albums, these artists are like, a little bit older, but I'd be kind of interested. Do you have any artists, albums? Do you have any maybe producers that you're following, kind of like today, that you're like, these people are influencing me currently?
Sure. Yeah, that list was just kind of like stuff that I remember growing up with that like really
Absolutely.
had
Mhm.
you know, monumental moments in my life where I was like, okay,
Mm,
yeah, I mean, I really like Tony Berg stuff with Phoebe. I think he's
mm,
amazing. I think
yeah,
that both, I mean, all her records are so good. Like,
yeah,
um, I like Gabe Goodman stuff with Noah Kahan. And
hmm,
there's so many.
yeah.
um, you put me on the spot here.
I know. I'm sorry. That's my bad.
No, it's all good. I love Great Grandpa stuff. Love
Mhm.
their stuff. I like Wednesday. I like that band a lot. Blonde Shell. Her stuff's
Yeah,
really cool.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, a band Mama is really cool.
Hmm,
Big Thief. I love that band so much.
hmm,
Yeah.
yeah. Those are all great, great bands, and I guess I'm curious too, like, and maybe this is putting you on the spot again, and if so, I apologize, but I am curious, like, what do you feel like, where do you feel like music is kind of going? Maybe from a production standpoint, we talked about, the wall of sound, and then kind of stepping into some more simplicity. Do you see things kind of shifting and changing right now, or do you feel like it's kind of stayed plateaued for a little while?
Yeah, I think it's gotten pretty boring the last
Mm,
couple years, and I not just myself saying this, a lot of other friends within the industry and things like that, and
mm,
I feel like it. What I said about in Rainbows and the Chronic, it's like I feel like
yeah.
there's a lot less of that happening right now, and even
Mm,
when artists, which will go unnamed, but like some people are afraid to take those chances,
yeah.
and
Yep.
they'll just stay. And again, it's fine. It has to be artist dependent. It has to make sense. I think that
Mm,
it can't be. I don't think you can make them do something that they don't want to do.
mm,
But I feel like it seems to be that a lot of artists don't want to be challenged.
mm,
Younger
sure.
artists today, and
Yeah.
I'm not trashing them or anything like that, but
Mhm,
I, I think that that's a good, especially as a young artist who's. It's like I feel like there's a freedom like that you should be allowed to have and just kind of experiment and do things that are just different and even crazy and like whoa, that doesn't make any sense. But
mm,
I feel like that's where a lot of these great artists and timeless artists. I feel like that's a lot of the things that they did.
yeah, absolutely,
But yeah, I
yeah,
think the last couple
pushing the
years have
boundaries.
been a little boring. Everything starts
Mm,
and it happens every, I don't know, every decade or whatever, when everything starts to sound the same,
yeah, yeah,
and then it's like, okay,
mm,
which usually means there's going to be some change coming.
mm, yeah, totally, and you haven't totally figured out what that might be. There haven't been any inklings yet as to what that could look like.
Well, there's been a couple. I'm trying to think. McGee is a big one that
Yeah,
came, over the last
mhm,
year and a half or so, that like
yeah,
really kind of like, whoa,
yeah,
that doesn't sound like anything I've ever heard before.
mhm,
And
absolutely,
so there's some fresh air right there.
yeah, yeah, totally. Um, I don't know if you listen to Ethel Cain at all.
Yeah, totally.
Um, but that was like, I know from a like a music creator and critic standpoint, like that album that she just put out was like one that just was like totally like ruffled a lot of feathers. It was very like divisive. A lot of people were like, "Hey, she's trying something new." A lot of people were like, "What in the world is this? Like this
A
is like
lot
a
of
swing and a
10-minute
miss."
songs or eight
Yes,
minute
it's absolutely
songs.
yes. Yeah. But I feel like, whether or not I guess whether or not your opinion is did this hit or did this miss, I guess in some senses that artist is taking a risk, right? Kind of
Yes.
what you were saying. You wish that some younger artists would do a little bit more is maybe take some risks and um, you know, I guess you just have to take a risk and like see if it lands or not. And that's when like, do I keep going with this or do I do something different? And that's kind of sometimes it takes a few years before you even realize was
Hmm.
that a proper move. Um, I think like I've talked about this a little bit on this channel here, but I think personally, Bon Iver, Justin Vernon is like one of my favorite artists, and his what he did with 22 a million was
Yeah.
like so crazy at the time, and I was like, ugh, like, why do you do this? I just wanted more. Like, I wanted more self-titled, I wanted more for Emma. But like now it's my favorite album because I'm like, he did some
Same.
crazy stuff on here, just so amazing. And look at him now. He's a happy guy with a happy album finally. And like, I don't know. He's an artist that I would look at, and obviously he produces a lot of his own, or at least is involved in production. That I would be like, I feel like he tries to push the bounds of stuff.
Yeah.
He might not have as much influence as some of these, like a Radiohead or an Outkast or Dr. Dre, but I think in the indie sphere he's got quite a bit of influence.
Yeah, absolutely. That album doesn't sound like anything else. There's nothing that sounds like that album.
Yeah, completely. And it's just so like, yeah, I don't know. It's one of those albums that like every time I hear that opening track, I'm just like, in the same way of Kid A, I'm just like, man, like it just takes me back to a time where yeah, I felt like this is unlike anything that I've ever heard. And it is like, yeah, I think it definitely is getting harder and harder to find that stuff, especially in the mainstream. And I see we have something. Well, we have several things in common, but we have something else in common, which is funny because we're both in Nashville. But I don't like modern or pop country either, and you said that you don't really like that. And it's so funny to be in a place surrounded by that, and to be like, this all just sounds the same, and like it's kind
Like a
of like a
beer
cookie
commercial.
cutter thing. Yeah, it's kind of like a cookie cutter thing, and it gets frustrating when you see like these are the artists that are getting really pushed and like getting out there and are selling tons of records and stuff, and like some of these within country but not, maybe not modern or pop, some of these smaller artists that are doing really cool things or doing things a little more unique or whatever are just not, because they're not Morgan Wallen or Luke Combs or you know whoever else. So it's, yeah, anyway, kind of went on a tangent there, but yeah, we do share that in common, frustrations with modern and pop country.
Yeah, that's I don't want to sound like a hater, but it's
Mhm.
just not my thing, and
Yeah.
it just all sounds the same to me, and I don't like that. It's almost like you just can't take chances in that world.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, totally. um and like what kind of like drew you to the indie sphere? Was it all just kind of like happenstance, or was that just where you kind of gravitated toward?
I think it was a little of both. I think as I started coming out to Nashville, I've been coming. I've lived here for a couple years, but I've been coming to Nashville for like 7 or 8 years even.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, one of the first things that I noticed coming out here, I was like, man, there's a pretty decent indie scene out here. Like that,
Yeah.
and at the time, no one was really talking about it, and at least as far as like the industry goes and stuff like
Hmm.
that. Um, because I would say when I started coming out here was more like the Americana thing was
Yeah.
big, the
Yeah,
Isbells and
totally.
like the state,
Yeah.
all that kind of
Hmm.
the Sturgills, that side of
Yeah.
of Nashville was really big.
Hmm.
But yeah, so you could tell like there was just like all, and then there was all really young kids um that could play, that there were, most of them are great musicians
Hmm.
that that listened to a lot of older music, funny enough,
Hmm.
like a lot of 90s
Yeah.
stuff, a lot of,
Yeah.
which was interesting.
Mhm.
That's actually that stuff definitely, they're like 90s shoegazy kind of stuff,
Mhm.
definitely um found its way on a lot of the Briston stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
But yeah, and then I just started yeah, just kind of started working with this guy named Hank Compton, who actually, I think that was the first indie record I did out here.
Hmm.
And he's amazing. He's a songwriter over at Big Loud
Oh, okay.
now, but
Mhm.
and that kind of led to other things, and then yeah, the Briston thing happened,
Mhm.
and again, nobody knew. Like, you would have never known that freaking out was going to be this huge thing, or even he
Yeah.
was going to be, you know,
Hmm.
what he's become.
Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty crazy, and yeah, he's just put out another album and is yeah killing it. Um, I actually I discovered Briston through when I was in high school. I listened to just a ton of like alt rock, and Manchester Orchestra was like a band that I just listened to all the time. And he did like a collab with them. Bottle Rocket is what it was called.
Yep.
And so that's what I was like, oh, this like I really like this guy's voice. So I went over, and then that's when like I found Freaking Out on the Interstate, and that I was like, this is amazing. Like I love this. And it actually sent me down like a whole kind of rabbit hole of what I've kind of self called surf rock, like that kind of vibe. Like, you've got, your hippocampus, your um I guess now Axe and the Hatchet Men are kind of like that. Like there's several of these bands that kind of have, it's just like it feels like a little more of an uplifting like rock, right? And
Yeah.
um a lot of fun, a lot of fun. And yeah, so I kind of, that's kind of how I found him. And I really get that what you just said with the shoegaze, kind of that 90s stuff. I never really kind of thought that, but yeah, I can see that. And like the 90s were such a surprising time for music to me. And I think that maybe that's because I was born in the 90s, but like it's like it's one of those things where like you never appreciate your hometown. It's like
Hmm.
I've never like looked back or thought to look back and be like the 90s were like some of the best times in music, but so many people say that, right? That the 90s were like another golden age in the same breath as maybe the 60s and 70s can be talked about. And yeah, you see bands like Radiohead coming up, and some of the beginnings of the Dr. Dre's and stuff, some of that rumbling, and then obviously they carry into the 2000s. But I would be very interested, just because I haven't talked a lot about Radiohead on this podcast, but I'd be really interested to know what your favorite Radiohead songs are. Um, if you
Yeah.
have a five, or even if more than that, whatever, and it doesn't have to be listed in any particular order, but yeah, I'd be really curious to know.
Sure. The first one is, we talked about it. Everything in its right place. It's just
Mm,
an
yeah,
amazing. I think I love that song. Everything about it. I love
yeah.
Weird Fishes, Arpeggi,
Hmm. Hmm.
Paranoid Android,
Yep.
Karma Police is just a staple, and Body Snatchers. I love that
Hmm.
song too.
Yeah, those are all amazing Radiohead tracks. Yeah, so good. And I would also be curious about Outkast, if you have some
Um,
favorites of them.
yeah, I love Elevators from AT
Yeah,
Aliens. I love that track.
yeah.
And funny thing about that, on Rose, on Carnival, Briston Moroney's Carnival EP,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
that echo on the snare, I totally copied that from Elevators.
Really?
Yep,
That's
if you
yeah,
listen to it, that ga
yeah,
ga 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 thing, yep, it's
yeah.
completely copped from that.
Wow, that's so
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love Equimini. That's the song Equimini. I love the album, but the
Mhm.
song Equimini too.
Yeah, yeah,
Two Dope Boys in a Cadillac is so good.
yeah, it is.
Bombs Over Baghdad.
Yep.
And Hey Ya. Like, I know I'm probably not supposed to say that song, but like that, just because it's too popular. But like, it
Yeah,
again, that's a song where it changed radio, it changed the
yeah.
genre, it changed um, so many things in music.
Mhm.
It defied
Yeah,
all the rules.
yeah, absolutely, and it is funny, like, I don't know, there's this whole thing, especially now with social media and stuff, like, where you've got all these new fans coming in, and, like, they're trying to, like, maybe make their mark on the fandom of certain artists, and so they get a little salty when you say a list like that, and they might be like, "You're not a true fan if you think this," kinda like what you alluded to.
Uh-huh.
And I just find that so funny, because it's like, I don't know, like there's Hey Yeah, yeah, sure. It's their biggest song. It went more mainstream than probably any hip hop song of that time frame. Like it was crazy. And like that's where like obviously if it does that, then obviously it's a great song for one. But then two, just the significance of what it did to the for the genre, like you said, is something that like how do you I don't know, like how do you give enough credit to that? A lot of people are like, "Oh, like you're just saying the hits. Like give me some deep tracks." Like if you're a true fan, all of your favorites would be deep cuts. And it's like, "No, like hits are hits for a reason a lot of the time." Like obviously, yes, labels and stuff can be manipulated at times, but it's like for the most part, hits are hits because people really enjoy them and they're songs that did something in their time, especially when you think of older artists. But yeah, I think Hey Ya would be on definitely on my top 5 for sure. It's just such a great song.
Yeah. I mean, I can give you deep cuts, but it's still it
Yeah.
doesn't take away from how amazing that song is. And
Yeah, absolutely.
it's you could say all the obscure, songs on whoever's, you know, uh albums and stuff,
Mhm.
but we hopefully we want to sell records too so we can keep doing this and they can
Absolutely.
keep doing it too. So
Yeah, yeah,
without the
for
hits,
sure.
there's.
Yeah, totally. Um, yeah, that's awesome. I'm kind of curious, like, so we've talked a lot about like Briston Moroney, but one thing that I'm like really curious about, and this might kind of go into some of what we were talking about, how sometimes songs are not sometimes, but songs are sounding a lot the same, especially in certain genres. But like I've always kind of been curious about the like producer artist relationship, and like how like do you feel like that is um like one of kind of the most important relationships within this kind of creation of music? Like I would assume I know your answer, but I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, my job's always different with every artist. Like,
Mm,
it's some artists are very hands-on and know exactly what they want, and I'm there to kind of just, shift a little bit here, a little bit there, and kind of just make
mm,
sure that we get to the the end or whatever in a painless way or whatever. And then sometimes they need a lot of hands-on stuff where it's
mhm,
like that I'm heavily involved as far as like whether it's playing, writing,
mhm,
lots of changes, lots of editing.
mhm,
And there's not really a right way or a wrong way. It's just really going back to comfortability and stuff with the artist. Like it's
mhm,
whatever they feel comfortable with and um their goal is at the end of the day. But yeah,
mhm,
that is such a huge thing, like making sure that the artist is comfortable and
mhm.
trusts you. Like that's a
Yeah.
big thing. I mean, and you look at some of these albums that I had on that list. Is often they'll work the artist will work with the producer on multiple albums because they
Mm,
have that level of trust with
yeah,
like, okay,
definitely.
cool, I know I don't have to worry about this part of it. I just
Mhm,
need to do my side of it because he's got this. You know what I
mhm.
mean? And I think that's a huge safety net.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and I think like there's all kinds of like I guess like producer artist relations like that you kind of look at. Like you said, like a lot of artists they use the same producer for several albums in a row. I also think of like, to use a big name that everybody would know, but like Billie Eilish and Phineas. Like obviously the connection there is can't get any more connected than siblings, right?
Nope. Nope.
And like yeah, you're kind of saying that like everybody's different and you kind of approach a project with whatever needs they might have. um I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, do you feel if you would have a preference, do you feel like you would rather have like kind of one of those collaborative like connections, or do you feel like you enjoy those moments when the artist really knows what they want and they're kind of like showing you the direction?
I mean, I think it's um, I think it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe I think
Mm,
it's really hard when they don't know what they want at all.
sure.
Those are tough because
Yeah.
then you're kind of telling the artist what their point of view is, and that's
Mm,
not usually a good spot to be in.
mm,
Um, but somewhere in the middle, I would say, like I think those are how the best records are made is when
mm,
everyone kind of brings their strengths to the table. Like you can't be good at everything, right? You just
yeah.
can't do everything amazing. So maybe the artist at good is really strong at A, B, and C, and then maybe
Mm,
I'm stronger at D, E, and F. And then when those kind of things come to the table, I feel like those are where the best records are made.
yeah. No,
Did that
that
answer
makes
your
a lot of
question?
sense. Yeah, no,
Okay.
it makes a lot of sense. Um, yeah, and I think like I think it is kind of one of those funny things and weird things that like I don't know, for some reason I think people that maybe aren't in the industry, aren't in the music industry have um this like kind of put this on a pedestal of like the artist that writes all their own music, produces all their own music, like they're the ultimate, they're like, and that's the ultimate goal, and like if you do anything less than that you're kind of like people throw shade at that, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, like you collaborate, like or you know, in the country world, which you know other genres are like that too, but you know there's a lot of artists that you know sometimes they don't write any of their own songs or very few of them. They're relying heavily on writers, and yeah, I think it is really interesting as to why people value that so much, and I don't know why that's the case, but I hear that all the time. Oh, they don't write their own music, or this and that, or they use a ghostwriter or whatever. And it's like, I don't know. Do you like the music? And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's ego. I think it is. I
yeah,
think it's easier than ever for anybody to just record anything, right?
yeah,
Anybody can do
hmm
it for next to nothing on a laptop and
yeah,
come up with something halfway good, halfway decent,
hmm
but that's not how the best records are made. There's a reason why the biggest and best artists in the world have a team of people working with them.
mm, yeah,
Not that they shouldn't learn all how to do all those things. I think absolutely. Like, I think it's a great tool to add to your toolbox to be able to, record yourself and come up with ideas and demos. And who knows? Maybe it does. Maybe that is the record. That's awesome. But
mm,
I feel that, if you're being honest with yourself, like, and kind of putting your ego aside, like, again, all the big ones, all the most successful artists have their team,
mm,
because you can't do everything well. You just can't.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. So very true, and like I don't know, one of the biggest artists in the world, like, kind of deviated from her plan. Like Taylor Swift worked with Aaron Dessner for a couple albums because I'm
Mhm.
sure she felt like things were getting a little stale and like she needed to step out of her comfort zone and do something different. And a lot of people think those are you know, two of her best records that she's put out. And I think there definitely is like like a lot of value in like just here like getting other perspectives, getting other strengths involved in something. And yeah, I think I would agree with you. Ego plays a big role in like just wanting to be the be all end all kind of thing. Like this is all me. This is I do everything. Um and I don't know if like some of that is like coming from like the Bob Dylans of the world, or like I
Yeah.
don't know, Zach Bryan is like an example of that currently, who, you know, he's a lot of his stuff he's writing and producing himself, and I don't yeah, it's just it's really interesting that that's kind of the standard.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it's still the exception, and I hopefully
Mm,
it stays the exception that they
yeah,
do it to, that level, a Dylan or
yeah,
Zach Bryan like level. Like, like obviously everybody's different and things work for differently for everybody, but I still feel like that's the exception,
yeah,
you know.
definitely. I think so as well, for sure. Yeah. Um Well, we're getting pretty close to the end here. I've wanted to keep this segment a little bit shorter, just to kind of try to tie in as much stuff and as quickly as possible. But yeah, I really appreciated this conversation. Just kind of picking your brain a little bit, hearing about who's influenced you, and yeah, just your thoughts on production, the industry, all that stuff. It's been a lot of fun. Really appreciated your time. For listeners out there, go follow Tone Deaf. Instagram. You said you have maybe a TikTok coming, but Instagram is where you're at. And is it just Tone Deaf? Is it Tone Deaf Records or just Tone Deaf? I can't remember.
Tone Deaf makes records.
Makes records. There you go. Tone Deaf makes records on Instagram. Go follow him. Check out his stuff. Check out the stuff he's produced. You've got some really great stuff there that you've had your hands in producing and working with. So yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to be on this episode. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, Tyler. Had a blast, man.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Well, tune in next week for another guest and another episode.